Assalamualaikum everyone. I'm Danial. I'm currently a junior doctor working in London, and I actually started working last Ramadan as part of the immediate response to the first wave of the COVID pandemic. Now, Alhamdulillah, it's Ramadan again, and a lot of people mentioned that their whole timetable has turned upside down. They're finding it very physically challenging, they're dehydrated, they're finding it difficult to eat with the different eating times, iftar and sahur. So today what we're going to talk about is ways that we can actually combat some of these physical issues that people mention in Ramadan, and how we can actually make the most out of Ramadan, not only spiritually inshallah, but physically as well. So in Ramadan, a lot of people say that it's difficult for them to actually have a balanced diet. Now, it's always important to have a balanced diet, but perhaps more importantly in Ramadan, because to be honest, you only really have one big meal in iftar and maybe a smaller one in sahur every day, and so it's important to actually watch what you're eating at that period of time. Now, one very important thing to look out for in Ramadan is whether you're having your saturated or unsaturated fats. Now, the differences between those is basically a chemical difference in terms of how those fats are made, but to put it shortly, cholesterol in your body is made in the liver, and there is carried in two types of protein. There's things called LDLs and things called HDLs. You can kind of view them as good and bad cholesterol. So HDLs are good cholesterol, LDLs are bad cholesterol. If you have fats, which are saturated fats, those are things which come in fatty cuts of meat, cheese, creams, that sort of thing. That can actually increase your LDLs, which is the bad cholesterol, and this increases your chances of having heart disease and stroke. And if we remember, well, in our community, especially in the South Asian community, in Ramadan we're actually quite bad at making ourselves have a balanced diet. Throughout the year we may be good, but in Ramadan we think because we're eating less we're going to lose more weight and it will be healthier for us, which may not necessarily be the case because you're not watching what you're eating. So we have a lot of samosas, we have a lot of pakoras, very oily foods which are very unhealthy. So what you need to do to try and actually make yourself a bit healthier this Ramadan is to switch your saturated fats for some unsaturated fats. Things that are like oily fish, things that come in rapeseed oil, different types of oils that are much more healthier that you can quickly Google, and there's lots of information online about how to switch. That will help reduce your risk of heart disease and stroke. And surprisingly in Ramadan our risk actually may get higher than you think just because of how we eat in iftar especially. That's one thing. Another thing people always talk about in Ramadan is, doctor, I'm feeling very physically drained, I'm very tired. Well, firstly, it's because you're not having the amount of calories that you normally would in a day, which makes sense because you're fasting for such a long period of time. But how can we actually avoid feeling tired and physically drained during this time? Well, there's a couple of ways. Firstly, what we'll have to do is look at how we can actually balance our blood sugars. And if you're diabetic, you may now know how to do this quite well, but for those of us who aren't, there's a scale called the glycemic index. Foods that have a high glycemic index are basically carbohydrates that let your body absorb glucose a lot quicker, and they can cause a spike in your blood sugars much more rapidly, and as your blood sugars go up, then they'd eventually come down, and that can lead to having a bit of fatigue, a bit of a sort of post-glycemic headache. That's what people say, hypoglycemic headache, after your sugars go up and then they go back down. So what you need to try and do is actually have foods that have a low glycemic index for sehri, as what they do is they get absorbed slower in the body, and as they're absorbed slower, they kind of cause your blood sugars to remain more stable throughout the day, causes you to feel less drained, causes you to feel less tired, causes you to have less of that headache, less of that fatigue that people experience throughout the day in Ramadan. So that's something else to look out for. And those are the main things dietary that people are concerned about. Another thing people always talk about in Ramadan is exercise, and how can I exercise so I don't lose my muscle gains? How can I lose weight effectively, and not just through not eating, but I actually want to exercise? What's the best schedule for it? I've just come back from a bit of a cycle, so I just want to emphasize how important it is to continue with your normal gym schedule. I know gyms are kind of closed or about to reopen during Ramadan now, but it's important to maintain this healthy exercise regime. And firstly, that's because exercise releases endorphins in your body. It makes you happy, it makes you more alert, it makes you want to do things, it makes you less fatigued, and in Ramadan people complain about that a lot. Now the difficulty is in Ramadan, of course, you can't eat, you can't drink. Where are you going to fuel yourself for this exercise? Well, You've got to have a big sehri and a big sahur first of all, which I think most people do. And like we spoke about, it's got to be balanced. So you have a lot of carbohydrates. You try and keep yourself in a caloric surplus, which is difficult, of course, in Ramadan, but try and have as much as you can just so you can exercise effectively. And timing wise, it depends on your body. People want a specific timetable or schedule, but everyone is completely different. So it depends on your body. Most people find that if you exercise right before iftar, that's quite effective, especially if you're trying to gain muscle, because if you exercise before then, and if you can kind of last without needing a lot of water, then your body's in will basically require the fuel to come back straight away, and you're just going to have iftar afterwards. So if you have a high protein meal there, that'll be really good for your body to actually absorb that protein and actually build muscle. So that's the first thing. Other people find it a lot easier if they do it an hour after iftar. So you let your body digest iftar for a bit, you are refueled up, you have water, you can drink throughout your gym routine, and you can actually fit your exercise there, which is quite beneficial as well. So whatever works for your body, that's what we have to do. Thank you very much for tuning in and joining me for my pre-iftar exercise. I hope some of what I've said has been useful today. We've got to remember that our body is our temple, and Allah has made us this way for a particular reason, and it's important that we look after our body, particularly in Ramadan. So inshallah, we're able to make not only the spiritual gains that we hopefully will make throughout Ramadan from reading Quran, doing namaz, getting closer to family, spending time at the mosque, but we can also learn a bit and make some physical gains as well and keep our body healthy throughout.